The Gospel of Matthew, the 5th chapter, the 1st verse. Seeing the crowds, he went up on the mountain, and when he sat down, his disciples came to him. And he opened his mouth and taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you, when men revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven, for so men persecuted the prophets who were before you. Amen. Our gospel reading today is a passage from a collection of Jesus' teachings that the church calls the Sermon on the Mount. And if we read the teachings in full, then we can perhaps well understand why. One slight thought might be that perhaps the sermon as we know it could possibly be a series of teachings by Jesus spread over a number of occasions. For there is so much in it to absorb, perhaps too much for one sitting, with the danger of mental indigestion, not something one suspects that Jesus would welcome. Our passage from the sermon, then, has Jesus teaching the disciples a series of sayings that some biblical scholars refer to as the manifesto of the church, and is also called the Beatitudes, the blessed sayings of Jesus. The Sermon on the Mount also appears, but briefly, in the Gospel of Luke, and it is interesting to note that Luke, places it immediately after his version of Jesus choosing his 12 disciples. It has even been suggested that after the choosing, Jesus took them away into a quiet place for a week or more, a concentrated period of teaching, and that the teachings we call the Sermon on the Mount are a distillation of those teachings. Further support for this view, perhaps, is in today's introductory sentence. Seeing the crowds, he went up the mountain, and when he had sat down, his disciples came to him, and he opened his mouth and taught them. Now, in that sentence, there are two clues to the real significance of the Sermon on the Mount. First, Jesus began to teach when he had sat down. When a rabbi formally teaches, he sits down. And in our universities today, we speak of a professor's chair. And the Pope, when he speaks ex cathedra, a Latin expression meaning from the throne, he is seated. At the time of Jesus, a rabbi could and did give instruction and teaching when he was standing or even strolling around. But for his teaching to be really formal and official, he took his seat. So then, if Jesus sat down, it was an indication to those he taught that his teaching was to be both important and central to his ministry. Second, Matthew goes on to say that when he had opened his mouth, he taught them. The phrase, he opened his mouth, is not simply a decorative way of saying he said. In Greek, it is the natural preface for a most weighty saying, an utterance of really opening the heart and fully pouring out the mind. So there in Matthew's Gospel, and we must of course bear in mind that Matthew was one of the chosen 12 and was there when Jesus first spoke those words. There in Matthew's Gospel is that opening of Jesus' heart and mind to those who were to be his companions and disciples. And the authority with which he spoke throughout his ministry, constantly amazed all who came into contact with him. And if we turn to the passage in Matthew's Gospel, which brings the Sermon on the Mount to an end, we read, "The crowds were astonished at his teaching, for he taught them as one who had authority and not as their scribes." But just as startling as this authority was the standard he set for those who would acknowledge him as the Son of God and live their lives according to his words. A standard reflected on the occasion when he spoke to the tradition of the Jews with regard to sacrifice. At the time of Jesus, it was believed that if a person did a wrong thing, then that action disturbed their relationship with God. Sacrifice was intended to restore that relationship. But Jesus shows what to the world was a revolutionary message when he said that you cannot make right your relationship with God until you have first made it right with the one you have wronged. Forgiveness cannot come until the sin is confessed, not only to God, but also to those affected by that sin, and then action taken to remove the consequences of that sin. The sayings of Jesus that we call the Sermon on the Mount are the core and centrality of our beliefs in the right way to conduct a Christian life, but, as always, easy to say and believe, yet difficult to put into practice. However, Jesus never said that following him will be easy. Quite the reverse. Many times he spoke to the disciples of how the world would treat them after his death and resurrection. And although we today do not expect to suffer the martyrdom experienced by the disciples, martyrdom in the sense of losing one's life for one's beliefs, we do also, in a sense, lose that life when we respond to God's call to take up our cross and follow him. A losing of one's life, but a gaining of a greater one, underpinned by our response to those wonderful words uttered on the mountain beside the lakeside. Amen.